Marco Polo, Marco Polo, Marco
Polo! Hey, you ever play that game? I'm sure I'm not the only one. Once, my wife and I actually played that game. Once we were in a grocery store. She couldn't find me, so she said, Marco! But before I could say Polo, well, someone else did. So it's kind of funny. But if you no doubt guessed, today's story was actually written by an Italian explorer, Marco Polo, a guy from Venice, who went all the way to the China region to go hang out with Kublai Khan. So I thought maybe I would tell his tale that he wrote down in the 1200s here, and it actually gives a little historical note just to give us a little insight into what the people were like, what they believed, and let's see what sort of people they were. So, not many years after the death of Genghis Khan, Kublai ascended the throne. He overcame what opposition survived and reigned as emperor of all China. Save for Arabia, Hindustan, India, and some of the western districts of Asia, he ruled from the Pacific to the Dnieper River, and from the Arctic Ocean to the Straits of Malacca. There was much for these wild Tartars to learn from the Chinese. The Mongols had no definite laws. For instance, if a man was accused of a crime, he was tried before some official, and if he was found guilty, he was punished as the official thought best. Moreover, the Tartars gave nothing in charity. If a poor man begged of one of them, he would receive the reply, "Go, with the curse of God, for if he loved you as he loves me, he would have provided for you." That's kind. Many of the Tartars now adopted the religion of Buddha. This teaches charity to men and beasts. For who could say but the soul of a man's relatives was embodied in the beggar who pleaded for alms, or in the hungry dogs whose wistful eyes pleaded for a meal? Who could say? Well, that's what they believed at the time, and that's the sort of people they were. But let's see what Marco Polo has to say on the matter, as he went to the palace of the great Khan in Peking, in Cambaluc. So, let's see. Kublai Khan was a good ruler to the Chinese and did well for the country. He was anxious to know more about the rest of the world, and when he was told that two merchants from Venice were in his city, well, he was delighted and sent for them at once to ask questions about their rulers, how they lived, how they went forth to battle, and in what manner they administered justice. After these two merchants, the Polos, had remained in China for some time, they returned to Italy. Then they journeyed eastward again, and this time they brought with them young Marco, the son of one of them. The young man put on the Chinese dress and learned the 4 languages most used in the country. This pleased the Khan, but something else pleased him even more. He was hungry to know about the distant lands and the manners and customs of people, but when his officers returned from an embassage, they had nothing to say except to make reports of the business on which they had been sent. "They are fools and dolts," declared the emperor, and to the men themselves he said, "I have had far livelier hearken about the strange things and manners of the different countries you have seen than merely be told of the business you went upon." I guess he'd prefer to hear of the strange things and manners that, rather than just, I moved 17 heads of cattle, and I guess he was bored. I guess Kublai Khan was fairly intelligent and wanted some gossip or some culture. But it chanced that Marco was once sent away on a business matter. He kept his eyes open, and when he returned, he had a long story to tell of what he had seen. The emperor was delighted. At last he had found a man after his own heart. He sent the young Venetian on the most important missions and listened eagerly to the lively stories that he always had to tell on his return. After the Polos had gone back to their own country, Marco wrote a very interesting book about his years in China, or Cathay, as it was then called. The following stories are taken from this book. Here it is. You must know that it is the greatest palace that ever was. It was all on the ground floor, only the basement is raised some 10 palms above the surrounding soil, and this elevation is retained by a wall of marble raised to the level of the pavement, 2 paces in width, and projecting beyond the base of the palace so as to form a kind of terrace walk by which people can pass round the building, and which is exposed to view, whilst on the outer edge of the wall there is a very fine pillared balustrade, and up to this the people are allowed to come. The roof is very lofty, and the walls of the palace are all covered with gold and silver. They are also adorned with representations of dragons, sculptured and gilt, beasts and birds, knights and idols, and sundry other subjects. And on the ceiling, too, you see nothing but gold and silver and painting. On each of the 4 sides, there is a great marble staircase leading to the top of the marble wall and forming the approach to the palace. Now, the hall of the palace is so large that it could easily dine 6,000 people, and it is quite a marvel to see how many rooms there are besides. The building is altogether so vast, so rich, and so beautiful that no man on earth could design anything superior to it. The outside of this roof is all colored with vermilion and yellow and green and blue and other hues, which are fixed with a varnish so fine and exquisite that they shine like crystal and lend a resplendent luster to the palace, as seen for a great way around. This roof is made too with such strength and solidity that it is fit to last forever. Between the 2 walls of the enclosure, there are fine parks and beautiful trees bearing a variety of fruits. There are beasts, also, of sundry kinds, such as white stags and fallow deer, gazelles and roebucks, and fine squirrels of various sorts, with numbers also of the animal that gives the musk, and all manner of other beautiful creatures, insomuch that the whole place is full of them, and no spot remains void except where there is traffic of people coming and going. The parks are covered with abundant grass, and the roads through them being all paved and raised 2 cubits above the surface, they never become muddy, nor does the rain lodge on them, but flows off into the meadows, quickening the soil and producing that abundance of herbage. From that corner of the enclosure, which is towards the northwest, there extends a fine lake containing foison of fish, of different kinds, which the emperor hath caused to be in there. He hath, so that whenever he desires any, he can have them at his pleasure. His own fishing pond. A river enters this lake and issues from it, but there is a grating of iron or brass put up so the fish can't escape in that way. Sneaky. So it would always be filled with fish from the river. Moreover, on the north side of the palace, about a bowshot off, there is a hill which has been made by art from the earth dug out of the lake. It is a good 100 paces in height and a mile in compass. This hill is entirely covered with trees that never lose their leaves, but remain evergreen. Have you ever seen a tree that's evergreen? Maybe in Canada, but I guess over there, not as common. And I assure you that wherever a beautiful tree may exist, and the emperor gets news of it, he sends for it and has it transported bodily with all its fruits and the earth attached to them and planted on that hill of his. No matter how big the tree may be, he gets it carried by his elephants, and in this way, he has got together the most beautiful collection of trees in all the world. And he has also caused the whole hill to be covered with the ore of azure, which is very green. And thus, not only are the trees all green, but the hill itself is all green likewise, and there is nothing to be seen on it that isn't green, and hence it is called the Green Mount. And in good sooth, 'tis named well. On the top of the hill again, there is a fine, big palace, which is all green, inside and out, and thus the hill and the trees and the palace form together a charming spectacle, and it is marvelous to see their uniformity of color. Everybody who sees them is delighted, and the great Khan had caused this beautiful prospect to be formed for the comfort and solace and delectation of his own heart. Well, that's a pretty good house, eh? Pretty good pad. Not only did he have his own fishing pond, he had an entire menagerie of meadow with all sorts of deer and stuff that he can hunt at his leisure inside. Amazing. So Marco Polo wrote another tale here about how the great Khan ate his dinner. while he was visiting him. And let's read that one too. So, How the Great Khan Ate His Dinner by Marco Polo. And when the Great Khan sits at table on any great court occasion, it is in this fashion. His table is elevated a good deal above the others, and he sits at the north end of the hall, looking towards the south, with his chief wife beside him on the left. On his right sit his sons and his nephews, and other kinsmen of the blood imperial, but lower, so that their heads are on a level with the emperor's feet. And then the other barons sit at other tables lower still. So also with the women, for all the wives of the lord's sons and of his nephews and other kinsmen sit at the lower table to his right, and below them again the ladies of the other barons and knights, each in his place assigned by the lord's orders. The tables are so disposed that the emperor can see the whole of them from end to end, many as they are. Further, you are not to suppose that everybody sits at the table. No, on the contrary, the greater part of the soldiers and their officers sit at their meal on the hall in the carpets. Outside the hall will be found more than 40,000 people, for there is a great concourse of folk bringing presents to the Lord, or come from foreign countries with curiosities. In a certain part of the hall, near where the great Khan holds his table, there is set a large and very beautiful piece of workmanship in the form of a square coffer or buffet, about 3 paces each way, exquisitely wrought with figures of animals, finely carved and gilt. The middle is hollow, and in it stands a great vessel of pure gold, holding as much as an ordinary butt. I guess that's a unit of measurement. And at each corner of the great vessel is one of smaller size, of the capacity of a firkin, and from the former, the wine or beverage, flavored with wine and costly spices, is drawn off into the latter. And on the buffet aforesaid are set all the Lord's drinking vessels, among which are certain pitchers of the finest gold, which are called verniques, and are big enough to hold drink for 8 or 10 persons. And one of these is put between 2 persons, besides a couple of golden cups with handles, so that every man helps himself from the pitcher that stands between him and his neighbor. And the ladies are supplied in the same way. The value of these pitchers and cups is something immense. In fact, the great Khan has such a quantity of this kind of plate and of gold and silver and other shapes as no one ever saw or heard tell or could believe. There are certain barons, specially deputed, to see that foreigners, who do not know the customs of the court, are provided with places suited to their rank. And these barons are continually moving to and fro in the hall, looking to the wants of the guests at table, and causing the servants to supply them promptly with wine, milk, meat, whatever they lack. At every door of the hall, or indeed wherever the emperor may be, there stand a couple of big men like giants, one on each side, armed with staves. Their business is to see that no one steps upon the threshold in entering, and if this does happen, they strip the offender of his clothes, and he must pay a forfeit in order to have them back again. Or, in lieu of taking his clothes, they give him a certain number of blows. If they are foreigners ignorant of this order, then there are barons appointed to introduce them and explain it to them. They think, in fact, that it brings bad luck if anyone touches the threshold. Howbeit, they are not expected to stick at this in going forth again, for at that time some are like to be the worse for liquor and incapable of looking to their steps. So I guess they have big giant men in case somebody gets drunk and walks over this threshold. They prevent that from happening because they believe it to be bad luck. And if you ever ended up doing that, well, you lose your clothes and you have to pay a ransom to get them back. I guess that seems fair, right? I guess it's better than getting a whole bunch of blows for it. Woof. Anyhow, and you must know that those who wait upon the great Khan with his dishes and his drink are some of the great barons. They have the mouth and nose muffled with fine napkins of silk and gold, so that no breath nor odor from their persons should taint the dish or the goblet presented to the Lord. And when the emperor is going to drink, all the musical instruments, of which he has vast store of every kind, begin to play. And when he takes the cup, all the barons and the rest of the company drop to their knees and make the deepest obeisance before him, and then the emperor doth drink. But each time that he does so, the whole ceremony is repeated again. Wow. I will say naught about the dishes, as you may easily conceive that there are a great plenty of every possible kind. But you should know that in every case where a baron or knight dines at those tables, their wives dine there, with the other ladies. And when all have dined and the tables have been removed, they then come in a great number of players and jugglers, adepts at all sorts of wonderful feats, and perform before the emperor and the rest of the company, creating great diversion and mirth, so that everybody is full of laughter and enjoyment. And when the performance is over, the company breaks up and everyone goes to their quarters. Well, that would be a very interesting dinner. They said there were 40,000 people just outside on the carpets eating. This would have been an amazing dinner with a very, very big building. Definitely would have been memorable to anyone actually being there. But the opulence of that time, this guy had a lot of resources in his hands. But thank you very much for staying here with me, enjoying a story, learning about Marco Polo and his trip to China and his visit with Kublai Khan. He did a couple other stories too. But maybe next time we'll look at those stories and we'll have a part 2 of Marco Polo. But thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.